So thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak at what's been a fantastic conference. I was very impressed with the quality of the papers yesterday in the session that I attended, and of course my other fellow plenary speakers as well. Much food for thought about issues that are of relevance to you here in Indonesia, of course, but also as a close neighbour in Australia, we deal with similar issues around national identity and nationalism and these kinds of roles in society. So this morning I kind of had a challenge, I guess, in thinking about what part of my research I might present to you. And as there's been the lovely introduction here, I do a lot of my research on methods. And as a computer scientist for many years, developing methods for the social sciences. So how do we actually help and assist social science in moving forward, specifically communication, to make sense of this kind of world that we're in, particularly one which is kind of marching more and more towards digital forms of and mediated forms of communication. So rather than go full technical and kind of bore you with details of computer algorithms and such, from that perspective, I'll leave you within your own time to have a look at, if you're interested in some of my research work, which is all available online, and you can check it out in our communication analytics lab as well. I've got many PhD students and postdocs who do similar work looking at social issues and looking at ways in which we can discover thematic content and such and assist in that kind of research process. Rather, this morning I thought I'd bring a more lighthearted topic, and one which is still serious, but something which is a little bit more approachable, and that is of algorithmic culture and the recommendation age. So, with this theme of post-truth, I thought that this could be something which could guide us and give us a bit more insight into why this kind of whole post-truth thing has come to be, and what are some of the underlying mechanisms at play here within this kind of post-truth era. So I would say that post-truth is predicated on the rise and the rising role of digital social media. That we couldn't have the election outcome in America recently, or these kinds of revelations, without having social media. The very thing, you see fake news or these kinds of operations rely on the massively networked communication systems that we operate today. Now, part of this information dissemination mechanism that we use every day, so I would imagine everybody in this audience has used social media at some point this morning already. This network that we're part of that connects us as human beings to one another is actually driven by algorithms. Now, algorithms, I'm going to give you a definition of what an algorithm is in case you're going, hang on, what is an algorithm? But rather than informed skeptics. So if you think about you think about the media environment that we used to have, where journalists, editors, and other what I'd call informed skeptics were driving the messages, were checking the messages, were figuring out what's going to appear on the front page tomorrow, what's going to appear at the top of the bulletin tonight. That informed skeptical viewpoints were driving the information channels of the pre-kind of digital social media era. What drives the information and messages today are these kinds of algorithms, right? These naive algorithms, or somewhat semi-informed algorithms, which decide based not necessarily on public good or public interest, but on other factors. How many likes did this get? You've liked similar things in the past, you might also like this. What text is contained in this article, is the text that is contained in that article similar to other texts that you have consumed and reacted to positively or in some other way? Then yes, this one is more likely to appear in your newsfeed. Right? So you know of these concepts of like newsfeed algorithms and others. The fact that we're not getting just a temporal flow of information, we're getting a highly curated flow of information flowing through to us now. And this is all driven by algorithms. So an algorithm is actually quite a simple construct. All it is something which derives inputs, right? So it just pulls in information inputs in some way. It makes operations or decisions based on those inputs and what values they happen to be, and then drives a decision and output from that. So you think of it like a black box. that has various inputs and various outputs. So in terms of the Facebook newsfeed algorithm, it might be taking information in that's based on demographics, so your own demographic information. So for me, kind of young, approaching middle age, white, academic, particular, social circle as well, my connections, my actual social network. All this information is fed into that algorithm to decide what appears on the top of my newsfeed when I picked up my phone this morning. So that kind of, those algorithms that are driving that media ecology are what we're going to focus on today. And the effect of that on what I'm going to call, and others are beginning to call, the recommendation age. So when we first birthed the internet as a society, it was driven around sharing information. And we talked about this as the information age, right? That all of a sudden we had the ability to share the world's knowledge. We could take the world's libraries, we could put that information online, and we could actually disseminate it across vast distances. You would no longer have to actually physically travel to these libraries, these kinds of fonts of knowledge, that you could actually log on online and go and find that information for yourself. That we could begin to share not just texts, but other rich multimedia as well, that we could see images from all around the world just by actually logging onto our computer at home. And that was, it was a great dream of Tim Berners-Lee and of others, Vint Cerf and those who kind of founded these initial technologies. But what we saw then come was something that was kind of a little bit unprecedented, that we had mobile technologies as well that raced ahead. And all of a sudden the internet was not something just sitting on a computer in an office or in a library or at home. You actually had the internet with you wherever you went. And this then birthed what we call the social and mobile revolution, where we then saw the rise in social media and other forms of digital networking and communication. Beyond that, we now see the Internet of Things, right, as the next kind of step in that kind of evolution, where we're embedding sensors and connectivity to other devices, a water bottle or something else that might be connected to the network in some way and have some interesting little piece of information to throw into this gigantic information puzzle. But what's happening right now is that we're shifting away from what we might consider the information age, where we went and sought information online. I'm interested in a topic, let me go and seek that information out. Instead, it's actually reversed around. We're entering what we call the recommendation age, where information is not, we're not actually seeking information is finding its way to us. So when we turn on our devices, we don't even know what we want to read when we turn them on, do we? Right? When you look at your phone, you're not turning it on or going to it thinking, I want to search for an answer on this, or I want to find out, I want another definition of what an algorithm is. Right? When you turn these things on, often it's to see, what has it got to tell me? Right? What will I find out? When I log on, what is it going to tell me? And so now with this idea of recommendation age, it's the machine that's actually reaching out towards us and informing us, right, in that direction. And so you can see, right, that this has massive ramifications for this kind of idea of post-truth. So as I said, the recommendation age. All right, so I'm going to give an anecdote of personal recommendation. I don't know if anyone recognizes this TV series. It was called Firefly. When I was doing my PhD back in Melbourne in Australia, I shared a house with a very, very good friend of mine. I actually caught up with him just recently, Jason. So Jason and I, we shared a share house together, and Jason had a fantastic taste in movies and TV series and these kinds of things. And I would always count on him to, take me to an interesting movie and, actually bring home, series that he downloaded off the internet, perhaps illegally, but, got his hands on in some way, shape or form. And he would bring these back to our share house, and we would sit there and, eat our ramen noodles and watch, binge watch these kinds of TV series. We were poor PhD students. So One particular series that he brought home was this one called Firefly, which was just great. I mean, it kind of blended science fiction, which I love, with kind of Western themes, by director Joss Whedon, and it was actually panned after one series, the whole story. I'm not going to talk about it here, but I absolutely love this. The point here is that Jason was a fantastic proxy for me he understood my tastes, and he knew what I hadn't seen, and when he saw something, he thought, in the back of his mind, Dan's going to love this, right? I really understand Dan's taste. He really liked this last one. I'm pretty sure he's going to like this one. And this is kind of how our cultures have operated for a long time. You know your friends. When you see something, when you see a souvenir, you think, Auntie May would love that. Yeah, I'm going to get that for her, right? Or, my brother, he would really, really like this particular TV show. I should recommend that. So this idea of personal recommendation is built in and woven in to the human condition, and has existed for a long time. Algorithmic recommendation takes this one step further. So let me give you some statistics. These are actually old statistics. I would say most of these have actually increased in their value since I last updated these slides about 6 months ago. Recommendation generated back then about 40% more click-throughs on Google News. So if they don't use the recommendation algorithm, they just give the news in some other kind of format, right, not based on any of your social demographic information, that would generate 40% less click-throughs than if they incorporate some of your personal information in curating the news that appears on Google News. So if Google knows you and can model you, 40% more click-throughs on Google News, more engaging for the audience. 2/3 of the movies watched on Netflix are recommended. I took this as an assumption. You all know what Netflix is, right? It's a streaming movie and television media service. So you subscribe to Netflix. It has a kind of library of digital content, like media, so TV, shows, movies and such. People that watch movies and other content on Netflix, 2/3 of the content they watch on there is the result of a recommendation that Netflix has generated. Now that's profound to me, to look at that, to think that when people log onto Netflix, 2/3 of them actually probably, whether they don't know what they want to watch or they're swayed in what they want to watch, they log on thinking, I want to watch Star Wars again. And when they log on there, they say, hang on, no, that one looks more interesting. Let's watch that, right? 2/3 of consumers are swayed by that recommendation algorithm. 1/3 of Amazon sales are from recommendations. If you think about Amazon's bottom line, 1/3 of their business, their revenue is derived from recommendations made. Right? That's a huge figure. Right? And if you think about these as engineering experiments, the kinds of people employed by these companies are people like me, right? Engineers, computer scientists, who are then driven by this goal of saying, well, these are happy customers, right? They bought this item and they never would have bought it, so the business, the economic headed people in the company are happy because we're selling more. The consumers are happy because they're buying more stuff that they want to buy because they were recommended it. Everybody's happy, and so they twiddle around with the algorithm a little bit more and try and drive this number a bit further. Right? And so that's part of the mechanism of these particular companies. So from that engineer's perspective, how do they think about this? How do they operate? They have to quantify the recommendation process. So it's not like it was when, it was my friend Jason recommending a movie for me, and it was based on some kind of fuzzy notion of, I kind of think Dan might like to watch this film. Rather, we have to quantify this. It's in a computer. It needs to be in ones and zeros. It needs to be values. It needs to be something that can be operated over by an algorithm. So it needs precision. And so quantifying recommendation, what we look at within these kinds of systems are things such as historic behaviors, item metadata. So for movies or TV series, we know genre, we know actors, we know running time, we know this kind of metadata around the object, the actual media object itself. Its relation to other users. So a person has relationships to other users within a system. So you friend people on Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever system, social media environment you're part of. And so that relationship tells us something about your position within a network, this kind of social network. So that can be quantified as well. We can come up with metrics to understand your place within the network. So what it assumes is that there's a finite set of users and recommendable items. Right? I have my audience and I have my items that I can recommend. And so how do I actually decide how to meet those two things in the middle? That's essentially the problem as seen from the engineer's perspective. There are a set of items here the user does not know about, but they want to know about, or I think that they should know about these things, and I think that they would like these things if they saw them. So how do I make sure they meet together in the middle? And what we call a fitness function, right? The optimal pairing of object to user is a thing that the engineer is trying to solve. Right? So they see it as an optimization problem. They see the human condition as it exists, where we are kind of swimming out here in society. There are a bunch of objects, media objects, say, in the case of Netflix, over to one side, and the problem they have to solve is to ensure that we know about all the media objects that we might possibly like. So it's almost like free will is taken out of it to a degree as well, right? That we've already, like the engineers from their perspective, have decided these are the things that you will like, and I will make sure that you can see them. Right? It has a kind of Orwellian tone to it in a way. This is my only equation I'm putting in. As I said, I try and make this less technical than other talks I sometimes give. They measure this quality using what we call root mean square error, which is just basically what you're doing is taking all the items that you have in your database and say a rating that might be assigned to it and subtracting the real rating the user gave to it. So that the algorithms made a prediction and said, Dan will rate this movie, say, Star Wars Phantom Menace, 5 stars. And if I actually rate it 2 stars because it's an absolute joke of a movie, right, and should never be included in the Star Wars franchise, but if I rate it 2 stars, then it's actually a large error, right? So they're trying to minimize that error and get that prediction right. Whereas if I rated it 2 and they predicted 2, that would be 0, and that's what they're kind of trying to drive towards. All right, so this is the practical involvement aspect of the talk. I'm going to give you a job, and that is, this is a little app called Bean Hunter. I'm a big coffee nerd. I love my coffee, and I use this app when I'm going around to try and locate good cafes that I might not know about. And so cafes in here in this app are rated, so people give a review. You can see the names, you can see that they get to upload a little photo there as well. It gives you the number of reviews that have been made and the distance that the cafe is away from your present location. All right, so what I'm going to ask you is to have a look through this list here and pick me a cafe. Right, so I've picked this one deliberately because they're all about the same distance. So let's say distance is not an object. I'm willing to walk the extra 130 meters if it's a much better cafe and you think that I would like it. So based on this, you can see the ratings in the orange numbers there. So Pear Cafes go 6.5, Bass Espresso 7.7, Posto 7.7, Higher Octave 7.5, My Heart Garden 8.5, and the Realm Espresso 5.0. Right? That's the list there. So hands up in the room when I list the cafe, tell me if you would recommend this particular cafe to me. Right? So which one that you would pick if I was going to go to one cafe here. So how many hands for the Pear Cafe bar? No one? Okay. Bass Espresso? Okay. Yeah, a few hands. Posto? Anyone? Posto? Okay, interesting. Higher Octave? Couple? Okay. My Heart Garden? Anyone? Yeah, okay, couple? Yeah. And Realm Espresso Cafe? Alright, yeah, alright. So, a lot of people pointed me towards Bass Espresso. And what's interesting there is that you pointed me towards Bass Espresso and it's got a rating of 7.7, but that actually is lower than My Heart Garden, which has got an 8.5. Like, what's the go there? Like, why would you send me to one that's got 0.8 kind of points lower? The number of the reviews, but why is that important? More people, right? So more numbers gives you more confidence in the score that it might be right. Yeah, absolutely.
And this is exactly what we see in the real, right? And it's known amongst circles of people that design these kinds of algorithms, this is the cold start problem. Right? So you had a cafe there that had a high rating, but only had 2 users rating it. Right? Whereas you had another cafe which had a lower rating, but had more ratings. And so again, you had this kind of feeling that, there's more confidence there. Right? More people have rated it, so therefore there's more chance of being rated down, but yet it's maintained a high rating. So therefore the crowd has some kind of wisdom. But what happens when you've got, in this case here, this little cafe, My Heart Garden, which might actually genuinely be a better cafe, right? That 8.5 reviews, like with another 18 people coming through the door, might also give it an 8.5 or something around that, and it truly is the better cup of coffee. Right? But how will they ever get there if every single time everyone decides, no, there's not enough reviews there, I'm going to go to Bass Espresso, and it's going to get 25 reviews, 26 reviews, 27, right? You see the problem here, it's kind of like a winner takes all, that already because they've got the majority of reviews, so long as they maintain that kind of slightly good quality, that they will continue to receive more input and more reviews. So we call this the cold start problem, and it's how do we actually draw accurate inferences from small samples. So 2 reviews, how do I know that that's accurate? Right? There's a number of ways in which we try and actually control this within these systems, but you see that already we're coming upon a limitation in this kind of algorithmic recommendation system, that it's predicated on this idea of that you need lots of people going through, watching this content, reviewing this to actually be able to draw an accurate inference from it. So think also about, related to this, where the recommendations are drawn from. You've got things like the popularity problem, which I talked to you about just now, so this idea of more people going through, giving more reviews, but also things like bifurcation of feedback. You can end up with someone saying, yeah, you know, this is the best coffee I've ever had, and someone saying, no, gross, this tastes like filtered dirt. Right? So you can get this kind of swings of feedback. Someone gets a fantastic experience, someone gets a horrible experience. Right? So how to deal with that kind of data as well. So one way in which we control for this is called serendipity. Right? So the idea that we actually control the algorithm, the recommendation, to encourage discovery. Right? And there are cases of this happening where, in that case I just showed you of the Bass Espresso with, say, 20 reviews, of it actually removing that listing or altering the rating in some way as to actually encourage a consumer to go and try something else. Or more likely, small businesses, say small cafe owners, actually running promotions to get the number of ratings up. Right? So they know, they're aware of this problem, and they actually run promotions or other things to try and get that initial burst of kind of feedback so they can actually enter the system on a somewhat even playing field with the other cafes around. Right? So this is this kind of solution to the new content issue, not just more of the same, but this idea of how do we actually control serendipity, control people coming into contact with new things. It's a bigger problem also in music. If you've got a new band that's entering, so who knows of like streaming media, do you guys get Spotify or Pandora or other streaming music services over here? So when you've got a band that's an established band, that's fine because you've got existing songs through which you can kind of base recommendations of their new content. But if you've got a brand new band that's never been rated before, you've only got, say, the genre of the band or some other kind of very surface level information through which you can recommend it and put that content into a music stream. And so there's other approaches that you're using, like serendipity, to actually, the engineers are baking into the algorithms ways to inject that content randomly or semi-randomly into live streams so they can actually get some rating on that content and understand where it should kind of fit in the catalog. So I kind of call this also the hipster problem, right? So, you know, the idea of that hipster, right, always being ahead of the curve, right, and how do they like something before it becomes cool, that's kind of the serendipity issue. All right, so let's talk. I've talked about Netflix already, and Netflix are one of the big players in this kind of recommendation culture we're talking about. They actually had a prize back in almost a decade ago now, and they actually put some money online. It was $1 million actually for the design of a recommendation algorithm for their movie catalogue. At the time, Netflix was not streaming, they were mailing DVDs out to their audience. So you would actually go online, you would pick your movies, they would mail it, then you would wait, and then the content would come, you would watch it, you would rate it, and then you would mail it back to them. Right, so quite quaint, right? Kind of takes me back. And now we have just online streaming content, right? That's where it's gone. But at the time, they were still interested in how do we actually make better recommendations? How do we recommend better movies that people are more likely to watch and to rate highly? So what was it? So as I said, it gave you this kind of interface where you could add movies to your catalogue and it would mail them out to you. You had a kind of a subscription fee that you used, and you can see the star ratings here, right? So it gave star ratings based on what it thought you would rate this if you watched it. It says, for you, this is a 3.5, right? And you go, yeah, that's okay. You know, that's past the threshold. I've kind of heard about this movie or, you know, whatever else, and I'm going to watch it anyway. But yeah, this idea of other movies you might enjoy, this idea of recommendation goes back more than a decade. So the competition was announced in October 2nd, 2006. They provided a real data set of about 100 million movie ratings. So they had users in a database connected with ratings to movies. It was anonymous. They just had like a number representing each user. And it was a classic machine learning scale test, right? So you would train a model and then give the model to Netflix, and they would test it on data that you hadn't seen before to see, all right, this is how you've created a model. We're going to put these users in where we know how they've rated content and see how well your recommendation matches, like I was talking about before, right? That root mean square error. That's exactly how they tested this. All right, and they said that they would award the $1 million prize when someone could show an improvement of 10% of that root mean square error above their existing recommendation system. So you had to beat their own, what they considered the best at the time, by a 10% margin. They ran a leaderboard at the time, and this was something for engineers and us to actually upload and see who was kind of in front. And you can see the two at the top there. The winner was Bell Corps Pragmatic Chaos. It was a combination of engineers from Bell Labs in America and others who actually won this prize in the end. And they got there in 2009. So it took a couple of years, but eventually we cracked this kind of problem. But this is also an insight into how engineers work. Right? Jason and I, we actually put an entry into this problem as well. We wanted $1 million, of course we did. And we thought of ourselves as fairly, smart machine learning and computer science students. So we had a good go at it. We didn't get close to the 10%, but we made a good stab at this problem when we tried it. But yeah, it's an interesting one for the annals of time. So yeah, so the nitty gritty of it was, massive training set. They had a whole bunch of stuff, and each training record consisted of the user, the movie, the date of the grade, and the grade that they gave the movie. This is all the data that they had, and someone was able to actually improve the algorithm by 10%. And yeah, there they are, collecting their $1 million check. Right, so now, this is the interesting thing here. We smelt a rat at this kind of this prize from the start. In that, they've announced this kind of $1 million kind of prize for improving their algorithm by 10%. How much revenue do you think that algorithm could generate a company like Netflix or a company like Amazon if you could increase the accuracy of their recommendation algorithm by 10%? Huge amounts, right? We're talking billions of dollars of possible revenue gain by recommending people better things. So we smelled the rat from the start because Netflix owned the intellectual property of that algorithm now. Right? So this is a way to actually get a lot of very, very smart engineers working on your problem and giving them a set fee and say, there you go, there's your $1 million. So they didn't pay you anything if you weren't successful. right? So it's basically an R&D process turned around the other way, where the research engineers work for free, and if they happen to crack the problem, you pay them. And you pay them a fraction of what the real kind of commercial worth of that algorithm is. So, yeah, leave that one there. All right, how they actually solved it. And so this is where, once again, a little bit like technical terms, but I'll talk through it with real examples to make you understand. And this kind of approach is used in other recommendation systems. So this is what Netflix uses, but it's also what a lot of other media recommendation systems use. So if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook, similar kinds of approaches. So we call this collaborative filtering. The idea that user-based collaborative filtering is things like model me, so get a model, a computer model of me and who I am, find users that are similar to me, so find other kind of, academic, guys who like cycling and coffee and sci-fi movies and things like that. Recommend to me items that they also have already liked. Right, so that idea of create a kind of a model of one person and find other people like them, and then just try and share stuff that they might not have already shared or seen in common. The item-based collaborative filtering approach is slightly different. Model me again, but instead of finding other users like me, find metadata on items that are close to items I've historically liked. Right? So that's the more common one, right? The actual media object becomes the point of reference there, not the individual. So if I've liked a photo that contains a bicycle, Instagram might show me more photographs that contain bicycles. That's the dominant approach to how these kinds of media algorithms work. Now think about this in terms of this kind of post-truth era. If you've got an individual sitting in Facebook that liked an article that was critical of Hillary Clinton, then it becomes more likely for them to see another article that is critical of Hillary Clinton. And before too long, they're pushed down a particular line of reasoning and thought that says basically Hillary Clinton is the Antichrist, right? Because of the way that the algorithm is reinforcing decisions around items and their metadata and qualities. So this is kind of a practical example of how this works. So the item-based collaborative filtering. So if we have a user Z who's given 5-star ratings to these 4 films, Iron Man 2, The Avengers, Thor, and Guardians of the Galaxy. These have metadata such as action and Marvel. So think about what would be a movie that you could recommend to them based on that. And so what you would do in this case is think about that question mark down there. Give me a name of a movie that kind of would sit in that space there, close to those 4 there. Yeah, Iron Man 1, yeah, any of the other kind of Marvel films, Spider-Man, right? Something like that, because they're also Marvel, they're also action, right? That's the idea there behind item-based. User-based flips that around and says, all right, you've got user X here, and you've got user Y here, and user Z here is looking for a movie. Which user do you think is going to base its recommendation of a new movie off? User X or user Y? User X, right? So yeah, you look at user Y and they like romantic dramas and such, right? Tearjerkers, right? Tearjerkers. And then user X has seen similar movies to user Z, but they've seen Ant-Man and user Z hasn't, so that's possibly the one that's going to be recommended. All right, so you understand how the two kind of recommendation systems work. All right, so when does this work well? It works well when we've got access to reliable, large data. So this is another thing that this whole kind of shift into this era that we're in of recommendation is predicated on, is access to very, very large amounts of data. Right, so Netflix are successful because they've got a cache of all of this kind of media data and users rating it. Right? Facebook is successful because it has control of a large user base through which it can actually apply this kind of user base collaborative filtering. Right? These systems are predicated on having lots and lots of data to work. Right? This doesn't work if you don't have data to support the decision-making process and the recommendation. You don't need to model subtlety. Right? These are kind of the big hammers. Now, while engineers will drive, and they're getting better and better at doing this, these things don't model the subtle differences and characteristics of, be it movies, music, other kind of media content. Right? They're bad at the subtleties. So they're kind of, you've got to think of them as sledgehammers, not little jeweler's hammers. Where we've got standardized items, products, or service. So one of the things you're going to find is that in any of these kinds of systems we have that are built off a recommendation system, they're going to have very, very streamlined ways in which you can interact with them. So Netflix, watch a movie, rate it using a set kind of rating scale. With other systems, so Facebook, you can like, you can share, you can comment, or you can post new content. And the kind of content you can post is limited to a few kind of predefined categories. That's because everything needs to sit in this neat box. For the system to work, things need to be quantized into these little categories. Right? So part of the actual design of making recommendation work is actually built off what can work from a recommendation system approach. And there's a fundamental assumption that past behaviour will predict future satisfaction. Right? And I think this is one of the things that we as a society can use to challenge these systems in some way. Yes, they're useful, but they're useful to a point. And I think that our democracies and our kind of our way of life is sometimes better when we have a little bit more free will. Right? When we have a little bit more choice. And that choice is not something that's been pre-filtered by some kind of recommendation algorithm deciding for us what we should see or shouldn't see. Right? And there are ways in which we can actually fight back. So this fundamental assumption here about past behaviour predicting future satisfaction has been the subject of a number of critical responses to this, where people in Facebook have liked every single thing that's come through their Facebook feed and notice the algorithm go completely haywire. Or someone that did the reverse and just didn't like anything on their page, and it went the other way, right? So equally haywire, but in a totally other direction. So there are ways we can actually exercise our control back onto this machine to say, no, don't model me, right? I want to actually decide what I want to buy, watch, or otherwise consume. All right, another problem with this, and this is something to be aware of, is it's not just about clicking like or not clicking like. There's a lot of other things that are being built into these systems. They know that you're in the system. They know your GPS location. They know that you're hovering on the page. So even if you're not liking it, you're actually engaging with it from their metrics, right? So you've got to be careful. We think of like critical responses to this. You have to think like the engineer that has access to a lot more information and can do a lot more with it. But things like context-aware recommendation take into account things like, is this your own device or a shared device? This is the problem. I call this the kind of Peppa Pig and Game of Thrones problem. Right? I've got 2 young girls at home. They like to watch particular programming on the television. I also like to watch my own kind of programming on the television. I want to make sure that it doesn't recommend to them something that I might watch, and that it doesn't recommend to me something that they might watch, right? So this is something that a lot of these consumer electronics and other media platforms are baking into their devices and solutions, is understanding that there are multiple users sometimes of these devices. But it makes it challenging, right? It can really make this quite challenging. But yeah, if known, you can actually use it to filter and adjust a recommendation. I got this, so I was about to leave on this trip. I was in Sydney Airport and having transited from Brisbane, and I got a message on my phone from Telstra, my telecommunications provider, saying, do you need to turn on and activate international roaming? Right, so they obviously had seen my phone in proximity to the mobile phone tower at Sydney International Terminal, and deduced from that I was about to take an international flight, and and that I didn't have international roaming turned on, right? And it said that, right? So that's the kind of thing. Now, they would think, yeah, I'm helping the consumer, right? We're helping. Dan, might want to actually do this, and he might have just, might have slipped his mind. So he's deferred to us to try and, inform him that this is an option. But the counter to that is, it looks incredibly surveillance state, a bit kind of creepy. And say, I don't want you to know where I am every moment, right? So this is the tension at the moment, how to actually give better service to consumers of these technologies, but still respect privacy, free will, and these things. So this is the kind of balance. And I don't think the balance is necessarily correct at the moment. I think that there is a bit of overreach on the part of the media platforms and other electronic consumers actually doing a little bit too much with our data and without our consent. So this brings me to this issue of tracking, right, and trackers. So in the instance of Facebook, there's explicit versus implicit feedback. So this is what I talked about just briefly just before. The explicit feedback that we give are things like likes, loves, angry, sad, any of those emotion reactions you can do on Facebook. Shares, content posting. This is your way of actually making an active kind of click or an action in the platform itself. Implicit feedback is things like time on page, you're hovering over content. It tracks that, it knows that you're hovering. Where did you last visit? Right, so it knows your temporal kind of journey through the platform, and it knows where you actually exit the platform to or where you're coming in from. Right, now, depending on, those little widgets as well that appear on web pages that have like Facebook buttons or Twitter buttons and such, and have the loaded comments below. So when you see a news article and the comments are not of the newspaper, but they're actually importing a Facebook feed in there, that knows that you're on that site then. If you can see that comment bar there, Facebook knows that you're reading that article outside of the Facebook ecosystem because it's tracking that. For that little comment section to load, it needs to map across with your ID. So your web browsers track between pages. It's no longer this case where in a web browser, you're looking at a web page and it's only that web page that can see any input or output. Now we have this idea that you can actually be tracked across the web using these particular trackers. So yeah, you can look at things like geolocation, the device you're using it with. Google does this quite a lot, and they've done it since 2005. So they started applying to their search results personalized search. So rather than just Google as it was, which was based on just the information on the websites themselves and hyperlinks and such, they started to actually track users and use things like, what was in your email on the Gmail platform or other actions you'd made to actually personalize your search results. So in 2009, search became social. Basically not just of your own feedback, but that of your friends. So if your friends had searched for this information, it might be more likely to show up in your search results on Google. Think about that for a moment, right, in terms of kind of in-group bias and how we might, actually be steered towards inevitable outcomes when it comes to consuming digital information. So you're not just finding information based on what you look for, it's based on your social network as well. All right, so there's been some critical responses to this. One great book on this is by Eli Pariser, we call it The Filter Bubble. He talks about how the personalized web is changing how we kind of conceive of information in the web and what we look and read. He gives a great TED talk on this as well. There are other things like search engines. DuckDuckGo is a search engine that says it doesn't track you. So it's a clean kind of search engine. It doesn't use past search results from you. It doesn't track you in any way. It just searches the web as best it can given the text query that you've given it. Right, so that's another kind of critical response. And other things like plugins for browsers. So this one is called, I think that's, Ghostery. So Ghostery is a plugin that you can put in your browser and it actually blocks trackers. So when you load a web page, it actually lists on the right-hand side, it has a little pop-up that says, these are all the web services trying to track you. So that's like Facebook and others that are trying to reach in and find out what are you looking at on that particular page, because they've embedded code in the page to actually allow them to extract Dan Angus visited this page on this date at this time and viewed this particular content on it. Stayed on the page for this long. Clicked on these links on the page. That kind of information. And this kind of little graphic here is something you can see within Ghostery. This shows the trackers as they move through the web, right? So this is a network of pages that connect and allow information to go. This is from the Guardian's website actually, showing you all the trackers. So when you land on the Guardian, this is where your information goes across the web, right? To all these individual web services who are all collecting pieces from you. So within that, one of those nodes will be Facebook, another node will be other kinds of marketing and digital marketing companies who are collecting and siphoning your data as you just make your way around the web. So this is kind of where we're at with the web right now. It's no longer this kind of, you cannot think of it as silos of information that you kind of navigate across. It's a fully integrated kind of web of kind of connectivity between media enterprises and platforms which are siphoning your data and picking it up and then using that to push back content onto you based on these recommendation algorithms. We had a chat recently about this back in Brisbane. So on the left there, that's Simon Elvery. He's a data journalist at the ABC. We do a lot of work together when we run this little kind of community organisation called Hacks and Hackers, which brings journalists together with technologists to talk about these kinds of issues. And Caroline is a PhD student of mine who does work in this area as well. And Dr. Nick Cara and I do a lot of work on this together. We've got some grants and other papers we've published together and are doing more and more work on this. So Nick comes at this also from more of a cultural studies perspective. And so we're doing a lot of work on this. I'll make these slides available to you so you can actually navigate to that link. If you actually just Google though, this algorithmic life, Hacks, Hackers, or Brisbane, you'll probably find this on YouTube though. So it's about an hour and a half, and it's just a talk in a kind of public forum. We talk about a lot of these issues across the actual panel. Simon has done a lot of work on this idea of algorithmic accountability. And he's interested in how, from a journalistic perspective, algorithms are pervading not just through our media ecosystems, but other decision-making enterprise. So social welfare, parole hearings, these kinds of other kinds of avenues in society where algorithms are starting to play a role in the decision-making process. And the kind of caution that needs to be made on deferring too much of the decision-making, perhaps to the algorithm, rather than using humans to do this. So yeah, check that out as well if you're interested. So that takes me to time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll welcome any questions you might have at this stage. And that is our beautiful campus, so yeah.
I'm not gonna sum up your speech, so we have more time for discussions. Untuk yang mau bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, saya bersedia menerjemahkan. I can translate the questions back to English so then we can have more questions in. First question, please mention your name, university, or institution. 3 questions, 3 first questions. 1, 2, 3.
Good morning then. I will try to address some questions concerning your presentations. Well, I think there are 3 aspects that become my concern based on your presentation. So the first is about the balance of review. Normally, when it comes to social science, normally we not only pay attention on the rating itself, but we also consider the balance of the review, or tone of the reviews, or the propensity of the reviews, or whether the content of the message positive or negative. Some people consider the positive message as more credible than the negative, while others think in different way, perhaps. That's the first statement or question from me. And the second is about the method or methodology. When we try to apply this, let's say, new perspective in social science or in communication science, of course, I think there will be some barriers concerning the methodology itself. Because in communication, just like other social science, we have a rigid methodology. It is quantitative or qualitative. And how about issue about the sample or something like that? Okay, that is this number 2. And the last question is about the machine. Did you develop your own machine, or how can you get access to this machine, algorithmic machine? I think that's all. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Sorry, my name is Imam. I'm a communication student.
Okay, and the first question was about the tone of review.
Yes.
Okay, second question.
My name is Amia. I want to ask you about related to the children and teenagers protections to internet. This is the first about you talk about the algorithm recommendations, and then I got the answer from serendipity and collaborative filterings, and also the last is the context-aware recommendations. From the 3 for the answers of the algorithm things, that which one is better for children, then how that we are as a parents or academician help other parents to get this kind of apps, or how we can more give protection and age appropriate for the content that the children can search the internet. Thank you.
Third question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Irwan Julian. What is your recommendation to overcome fake news and misinformation? Because as you know, there's an expert called Man Sarlis. He told to Al Jazeera that the term of fake news was originally used to refer to stories that were entirely fabricated and largely for the purposes of tricking Facebook's algorithm to reach a larger online audience, and of course to generate more advertising revenues. First, people make a trick or to cheat the SEO, search engine optimizer, to cheat the search engine, and then they make fake news so that they can manipulate the algorithm recommendation of Facebook. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for these are fantastic questions. Very pertinent. So the first one around methodology. Yeah, I am a mixed methods researcher, so I don't ascribe to be a quantitative or a qualitative methodologist. Rather, whatever method allows you to best answer the research question you're posing is the right method to actually choose. So I see my role as a computer scientist as supporting the choices of my colleagues within social science, communication and other areas in actually finding the most appropriate method for the research that they want to embark upon. And so that's it. Every method that you use has fundamental limitations to it. So exposing these limitations is at the forefront of my mind. So in the computational methods work I do, it's always about communicating not just, hey, this is this bright, shiny, new computer thing, we should all use it, which kind of happens a little bit, I've seen happen with big data. It's seen as this kind of panacea that, oh wow, now we can answer all the questions and we can do all of the research we've never been able to do. And that's not right. You need to actually slow down and say, no, let's be critical about the method and make sure that the method itself can actually address and answer the question that we're posing in the most appropriate way. But also that we're not limiting ourselves by historical accounts. So, you know, if it be survey research, how can we do survey research given that we have access to such a wide audience of potential survey respondents now? Or how do we do this in ways, how do we do ethnographies, but do ethnographies in a way that we could collect perhaps more data or more rich data than what we possibly could have before? So one of my particular technologies called Discursus is built around visualizing conversational data. It's never intended to replace the rich kind of the deep read of the conversation transcript or reviewing and listening to the conversation multiple times. Rather, it's seen as an augmentation. Say, here is another view of the conversation as a visualization, as another projection of what's going on that might give you some extra information on which to base your actual analysis of this from a qualitative perspective. So I still see a lot of the computational methods as being in service of the research question, right? The method should never come ahead of the research question that you're wanting to actually address. So that would be my first point around methodology. Your other questions were?
The tone of the review.
Oh yeah, the tone of the review. So very important. There's been a lot of work, and this is a lot of work in my area of natural language processing as well, on how to actually extract automatically tone from things like written reviews. So while the examples I gave were all of, you know, star ratings and very quantitative data, we've done a lot of work in actually extracting meaning from text. And so you find a lot of these systems now are reading through that written review to try to extract things like sentiment, tone, and other kind of information and quantify that in some way. Look at what topics, what are people talking about thematically, what are they talking about when they review this content, what are they actually saying thematically, conceptually within that review itself. Now, within that, I would say as someone who does a lot of work in this field, we have to be really careful because irony, sarcasm, right, these things that kind of go underneath the radar of a lot of the algorithms as they exist at the moment, these are things that we're not even good at reading as humans. And so if our computer systems are predicated on the way that we process language, then they might fall afoul to the same issues that we've had ever since we saw internet and computer-mediated communication be a thing. Depends. The context, it makes it impossible to say what the error rate will be. There are some cases for which you can achieve very high accuracy. There are others that you will not even bother because there's so much hidden meaning behind the text itself, the construction of it, that it basically is impossible to make sense of in some cases. I mean, I'll give you a classic case of this. If you look at messaging between young teenagers through instant messaging chat that are using not just text but emojis and other kinds of devices to like semiotic resources to communicate. How, like, as a parent of a child like that, you might not even know what they're saying, right? So if you can't understand it, how can a computer make sense of that information just the same? Language evolves is another part of this. So these systems are often built on static corpora of text and information, but we know that language is highly dynamic. So we create new language all the time, and that language, when created, has different kinds of meaning. So these are the kinds of challenges that a lot of computer scientists set themselves, is how do we actually accurately model that text in those reviews, but it doesn't stop them from doing it. So this is what I'll say, like, there's one sense which is the research side of this that I'm interested in, but on the commercial side, these limitations are not stopping them from moving ahead and sucking this data in and trying to use it, right? And that is a danger because, yeah, it might be getting it wrong, and when it gets it wrong, what does that mean for the restaurant that's now getting dropped off the list of recommendations because it misinterpreted someone as saying, something that was actually positive as laced with negative tone, right? So yeah, that's the thing you've always got to be careful about as I think the algorithm designer in a commercial world. So yeah, so does that answer your 3 questions? Was
The
it?
third question was, did you build your own
Oh,
machine?
Yeah, so these kinds of machines, we are building one of our own systems, but it's going to be, let me unpack this. So the systems that we've looked at here, Facebook, Netflix, and others, are all closed proprietary systems. We will not ever, I think, be able to see under the hood of these systems. This is their commercial value. So the details of those algorithms, Facebook's recommendation algorithm, you will never know the details of that, because if you did, then we could game it, right? So we come to the SEO argument, right, of this question here. So if you knew the full details of it, it would actually then be open to gaming by various parties. So no, we can't know the details of those algorithms. However, we can study their effect. And many scholars have done this, where they actually look at, across different accounts, what is the kind of information that's being shown there. So this brings me to a project that I'm doing with Nick, who is in that photo there sitting on the right. So Nick and I are actually looking at this with regards to alcohol branding. And we know, for example, that alcohol brands in Australia are marketing particular messages towards different demographics. So young males receive one kind of very anti-female, misogynistic messaging, and they engage in these kinds of misogynistic conversations within that brand's Facebook page, but those posts cannot be seen by women on the platform. They're hidden from view using the Facebook algorithms, right, that allow particularly pages that are paid content, so market, like actual commercial enterprises, to actually push messages to specific demographics. Now, this is a big concern because that notion of accountability of marketers, so when you have advertising in the street, if it contained these kinds of misogynistic images and messaging, we as a public, and I imagine you as an audience, would see that and be outraged. And there would be complaints, to standards boards, and that advertising would be taken down. But when the audience is able to be targeted and the message only seen by a sympathetic audience, then we have no public accountability for those brands and that marketing. And that's the real danger here, is how transparent these companies can be when they're allowed to actually operate and market specific messages to specific audiences that exist on that platform. So that's my bigger concern here, and it's certainly been a concern of Nick's for many years. He's done a lot of alcohol research, looking at how they message and brand with youth audiences in particular. So what we're embarking on is actually to try to simulate one of these algorithmic platforms. We're going to create an open source, so fully inspectable approach that uses the best of recommendation algorithms, machine learning, all the things that are available online today, to put this together to show what might be possible, right? So use it as a kind of a critical simulation to show and reveal this is not, we can't know whether these things are being used by Instagram or Facebook, but it's at least possible to show and reveal what the possibilities are of these systems, what they can do to our media ecology, rather than know necessarily what those individual companies are in fact doing, which we cannot know unless, we subject them to some kind of legal action and got them and forced them to reveal those details. So absolutely, this is an important part of it I see, is stimulating these kinds of recommendation systems in the public's eye, so we can gain a better understanding about how they manipulate our information ecology. Which brings me to your question, actually, when it comes to youth, right, and their interaction. So when you're talking about children, you're talking about very young children, or you're talking about adolescents, or like anyone under 18? Like any child, or?
Yeah, from toddler to adult.
Yeah. So look, I'm a parent myself. I've got two young girls, 4 and 6. I think we have to be very careful as parents. I think it's hard. Regulations are not necessarily the answer. There's been a case in America recently where they've banned, where they're looking to ban smartphones from children under 13, and I think that's not a good approach to this problem. Abstinence doesn't work, right? Taking or removing things away, it rarely works, and society has numerous examples of that not working. So in the case of America, in that context, given it's where this case study comes from, they tried this with teen pregnancy and actually removing contraception and removing education, because education was seen as the temptation, right? When they talk about sex, somehow that would then allow it to happen, right? And actually it had the reverse effect. By not talking about it, by removing that, teen pregnancy rates went up. I don't think that removing the technology from the child's hand is going to allow them to learn and become critical and educated about the technology itself. However, I think we also need to educate parents around things like the dangers of being online, about how much information one puts out there, right? About these kinds of things, when you're talking about social media, having these things out in the open, right, is a big part of this. I talked about this, and I talk about this on the media a bit as well, actually, this topic. And having technology in the open, I think, is one of the most positive things we can do when it comes to children and their exposure to technology. So when I say in the open, I mean them not be in a private room or space on a messaging app or on a forum or something else, but to have it there with you and to talk with them about what are they using, what are they messaging, who are they messaging, right? Why are they doing it? Do they enjoy doing it? Get them to actually become critical consumers of this and understand that they're the ones who have the power in that technology-human relationship, right? So they can actually become more critical about their role with technology, because they're coming into a society which these technologies are completely enmeshed in everything we do. So whether we like it or not, this is the world that we've created for them that they will one day inhabit. So I think this is part of it, is educating them clearly around their media consumption habits, why they use particular technologies, what they think of information that they see online. So take a more philosophical approach to it, take a more critical lens to it, and a reflective approach to the kind of content that they're seeing and their thoughts on it and their feelings, and be able to talk about this at large. If we can do that as a global society, I think we're going to be in a better place when it comes to their understanding a relationship with this media. Because I see too often at the moment, banning, so just taking it the kind of it away, can have very negative consequences. People feel isolated from conversations that happen online. You remove their right to defend themselves online as well. So if someone's being bullied online and you take it away and say, we're going to take you out of this situation, while that might work as an acute response, at some point they're going to have to go back online. And so you want to make sure that they're skilled in a way to be able to respond and actually fight back and empowered to actually own their own digital space. So I don't think there's one answer to this, unfortunately, but I think key is education, keeping technology in the open, and actually having that conversation with our children around the media landscape that they're a part of, right? That Facebook is a commercial enterprise, that Google is a commercial enterprise, that these enterprises want to sell you things, right? What Facebook is selling you is actually you giving it your time, right? If you spend an hour on Facebook today, that is an hour of value that they have taken from you, not the other way around. So actually teaching them critically about this, that you are giving, when you are logging onto Facebook, you are giving them value, right? So actually put value behind that and say, do you want to give Facebook an hour of your time today, or would you rather go out and play a game of football or do some other activity? Which is of more value to you? That kind of a conversation can happen. All right, and to this last point, I mean, this kind of picked up. What was the exact question again? It was
recommendation regarding fake news and misinformation, especially in the world of journalism. The case was Al Jazeera,
Yeah,
in which a news was entirely fabricated.
yeah.
How people cheat SEO and then make fake news.
Yeah, so since time immemorial, we've had people trying to game the algorithms, right? So when Google was in its infancy, there were already people out there selling their services to try and boost your appearance within the Google search feed. This is not new, right? So what I'm talking about here in terms of recommendation, quantify, it's not new. It's something, it's a long line. It's just what we're seeing is, back then, we were still seeking information. Now, that kind of direction of information flow has reversed. So the implications then for those who are doing this, like creating misinformation, who are playing these kinds of games online, and some of them making very, very good money doing it, right? There is a commercial imperative behind this. So the whole like fake news, exactly as you say, and this definition is the same definition I would use, that fake news is completely fabricated news, but in a way, it's news that's trying to build on current topics. So it will be topical. It means that people will be more likely to click through on it. And then it's about creating profit for the person that created it, or sometimes not just monetary profit, but as some in that online community, for laughs, right? For them to actually feel like they've had a stab at this big joke that is society and that they've got away with it. So there can be multiple motivations to do it, but likely it's going to be something like making money from advertising or driving traffic away from a mainstream site towards yours. This is something that I've seen responses, and we've asked as an academic community, we've been kind of beating our drums at the platforms themselves to get more serious about this, right? To implement controls that would actually allow this kind of information to be flagged early. The problem we're fighting against here is the effect of the network itself. By the time the journalist can catch up and actually debunk the article, it's already been shared so much across the network. This stuff just moves like wildfire through these networks as soon as it's kind of got a little hold in there. And people who are sowing these seeds, they understand the way the network works. They themselves have got fake profiles within the networks that they've built up to look very, very real and meaningful. They use these in a very calculated way to spread this kind of disinformation. And so some platforms have responded by tightening down controls on verification of account details, making sure that every user is in fact a real person. There are limits on how much they can do there. But yeah, ultimately, it's part of the unfortunate reality that as a society, we gave less value to good journalism and saw Facebook and these platforms as the future, right? And so they've been the ones who derive the advertising revenue, starving our kind of fourth estate, who were there to protect us and to actually, whether, you had some journalists who were more kind of skewed towards conservative, some who were more liberal, right? But even then, most tended to operate and work according to a code of ethics and principles. Whereas now we have this kind of open engineering experiment which has taken a lot of the advertising revenue, starved out journalism. And it's very interesting to see this response most recently in the last couple of days of the large media organizations in America trying to band together and use, they're trying to get around antitrust laws to be able to negotiate their position with Google and Facebook and others to actually charge those platforms for their content, right? Which I think is about 20 years too late, right, to have that conversation. But I think some of them thought, this social media thing's a fad. We have good content. Content is king, and we'll be fine because people will keep coming back here because they value the truth. And
It's co-opted by President Donald Trump and his support.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. But it's larger than Trump, though. I think we see this in Australia, we see this all around the world, that more and more people are consuming their news via online mechanisms. And this comes back to like the topic of this talk, which is about this idea of recommendation. We need to be critically aware of this, that it's no longer the editor that's setting the front page, right, that people will see on that day, right? The idea of the front page of the newspaper is something that I think in our lifetime will die, right? That no longer that is a concept, that, you know, the idea of the front page being like, this is the one thing that you need to know about today. If you talk about one thing at the dinner table, it should be what is on the front page of the paper. They can no longer guarantee, as a news organisation, that that one story will appear in the news feeds of all the people that are pulling stories from their site. Rather, it will be if there's a story on page, 36 that's about cycling, that's the one I'll see because I like cycling, right? Or, something else like that. So the papers have lost their ability to push that agenda. To be able to say, this is the curation of the best stories, you should read these ones to be an informed citizen, to know what is happening in your world. They've lost that power within these platforms. And that is the bigger concern here, I think.
We still have 20 minutes, so 2 more questions. One more question?
Thank you. So my question is about this system, because it uses quantitative data a lot. A lot of companies manage to exploit the system, right? For example, we have buzzers that just spread the things and then persuade people just to click, and then when people click the items or the post something, and then the company have to pay for that thing. So is there any way that the system built not only based on the number of those clicks, likes, and share things, but also whether the people really read the things, or whether they are really, it's about the intensity instead of the quantity. That's the first question. And the second question is about the copy-paste news, because the same things, the same content could be shared in different outlets or different online news media. So is it possible for us to detect this kind of news, copy-paste news? Thank you.
Yeah, so the first question, I've actually got a colleague who's in Brisbane and hangs around a little bit at the University of Queensland, and he's developing an approach very much like your first one. He calls it Worldview, actually, and what it's based on is a social media network, or a kind of a news aggregator, if you like, but one which is built on these principles of informing publics and actually, building up this kind of knowledge and having conversations about the important issues of the day. So it's, I would say, it's a more human values approach to doing social media. So it's built on a stronger philosophy of having, I guess, quality articles, quality discourse, these kinds of things. So less is more in a way. But one of the things that he's looking at putting in this system is an idea that having small quizzes or audience interaction about the issue that has just been read. So the value of this system comes not from just, here are the top 5 articles of the day, but here is the article, read it, what are your thoughts about this issue, right? Here is a quiz, tell me what did you take to be the most important part of this story? Who do you think the main protagonist in this story was? Like, basically, how do you actually generate good audience engagement around the issue represented in the article itself? So a different kind of approach. So there are people experimenting in this area to try and come up with alternative forms of doing social media that aren't so much just about like, share, single, very, very light touches. This would be more around deep engagement with the issues within the articles itself, if I could put it that way. So the idea of, not a shallow skim over the top of however many hundred articles you can in a day and feel like you're informed, rather actually flipping that around and saying, no, here is one article, read this and deeply engage and have a conversation about this with your peers. So that's the first point there. The second question, sorry, copy paste, yeah. Yes, we can detect this. This is actually one of the more simpler things to do because it's essentially like plagiarism detection. And this is actually something that other scholars have been looking at, is how to actually suck in and actually detect duplicate articles. There are legitimate duplicates that exist out there, so newswire services and such that send out texts and then they're adopted wholesale by organisations who are paid to do that exact thing. But one of my PhD students is doing this in an Australian context, and he's got a system that can essentially detect duplicates with a fair degree of accuracy. So yeah, that's actually less of a concern than actually the first question, which about ensuring people are actually engaging in content, right?
My name is Zahra. My question is, how can the company like mining, construction, or oil and gas company who has a business-to-business business model or limited market can use the algorithm approach? Because we cannot, it's not common for us to use like Facebook, Twitter, or something like that. So any recommendation from you that how we use the algorithm approach for B2B company?
So you're talking more about communication between those companies, or like ordering processes or actual engineering? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's nothing to stop you from doing it and commissioning a system that would do this to look and track the kinds of communication, the kinds of messaging you're doing. I mean, there are companies out there that are experimenting with this through content management services and others about the kinds of messaging they're giving their client base. Just because the dominant examples we see here are around things like consumer media and social media and news and such, doesn't mean those same systems can't be applied in this kind of commercial context. And so it would just be about designing some kind of analytics. So there are solutions out there. I know some of the big companies are doing exactly this. IBM and Microsoft and others offering this as they're kind of talking about their big data solutions. And they would look at it as a whole kind of chain of, or a pipeline from manufacturing through to various kinds of consumer interactions and client interactions, model that from a whole business perspective and look at where improvements could be made or strategic communication could be applied to achieve a different kind of outcome. So yeah, I would look to those first, those kinds of companies which are basically trying to do exactly this, where there is value to be made in improving those kinds of relationships that exist between various kinds of other corporates. Yeah, absolutely. There's work in this area. It's not mine, but I know of work.
Hi there, I'm Lisa. So what do you think?
So this is the last question because we only have 10 minutes left.
Okay, I would like to know your opinion. What do you think about what can we expect from communication that heavily influenced by algorithm? We've seen on social media people start living in their bubble and they become less tolerant with the ideas that oppose to them to theirs. So what can we expect from communication that we know is now heavily influenced by algorithm? Thanks.
Yeah, and this is a great one to finish on actually. So one of the things I didn't talk about today was, on one hand, we have the algorithm in the machine, but we also need to think about ourselves and consumers as kind of engendering algorithmic processes in response to these systems. And so what you're talking about there about retreating into a bubble is a kind of a response, right? It's a set of decisions made based on certain inputs, right? I like this, I don't like this, I do like this, therefore I'm going to change my behavior to do a certain thing, right? So we ourselves as humans are just, I guess, very complicated wet machines, right? And that have a set of internal decision-making mechanisms to react to the media environment we're part of. What we also see is not just about people in kind of filter bubbles and such, but even things like fashion, how people interact and behave, the kinds of places they go to, the kinds of experiences they might seek, are all changing as a result of this kind of enmeshment with the machine. And we also see this, and I actually see this with my own students from time, is a lot of them are much savvier with their use of social media than I am, right? And they are very good at constructing particularly imagery and sharing that online and garnering a lot of attention, a lot of reactions. You know, so they're very savvy users of Snapchat, of Instagram, of these kinds of social media platforms. And for them, they understand innately what kind of photo composition, what kind of subject in that photo, what time of day, what day of the week, that they would post that to garner maximum attention and positive attention from their social network. So it's even this, it's the tuning of the consumer towards the machine and the way the machine is likely to react. And when I say machine, I mean their kind of network of kind of followers and that, to garner the most positive attention. So you see it, right? Be it the kind of little photo of the perfectly placed donut with the coffee, you know, with this nice kind of blue sky and background, or whatever it might be, like the right filter applied to it. You know, all these kinds of things, when you see a heavily curated and very intentional image feed from one of these particular, and I would say it's mostly millennials that I see be some of the best at doing this, of highly curating their feeds. That itself is a reaction to this. And that forms part of their own culture, right? That their kind of response to this is to actually enact and engender a lot of these kinds of, this knowledge about what will receive. So it's not just, you don't just take a photo and send. You carefully construct that photo. You look for situations you think that would make a good share, right? Or this would help me boost my reputation amongst my social network, because they would see me here. Oh, look, I'm about to go overseas. Here is a photo of my passport with some of that foreign currency and a boarding pass carefully laid out on that table with just the right kind of light coming in from the side. Yes, you know, sorry, you know, we'll see you all in a couple of weeks, right? Humble brag, you know, like. It's that kind of a response that comes. And that's what I see happening, is that kind of enmeshment between the user of the social media platform and the social media platform that then is also feeding more of that kind of information back to them. So yeah, thank you so much for your question, Lisa.
Thank you.